Well, good morning, everybody. What are we talking? Anna Purchas is the London senior partner at KPMG. And she's going to be talking to us today about developing and leading your people, and has a wealth of experience as head of people, head of learning, I think, as well. And more recently, the London region senior partner. So really interested to hear what you have to say, Anna. And of course, by Francesca, who is, I always say, my companion and the person who has been with me for, oh gosh, more time than I care to remember. But certainly this is, I think, your 54th episode, is it? Something like that. Anyway, fantastic. And she normally, day job, is the global leader for network capabilities for Grant Thornton International. So there's very little happening, I think, across the world that she isn't going to be hearing from one or more of her managing partners she works with across that quite significant, important network. Myself, Richard Chaplin, and looking forward to being your host for today. Before we move on to the sort of what I call the poll part of today, I'd quite like to just talk you through some of the things that are happening in the forum at the moment. We, if you recall, had a very successful summit a couple of weeks ago. Had some really good feedback, and the videos are all available, and you may have seen that there are links to all of them in the invitation you received for today. So do, if you haven't had a chance to watch them, as a sneak preview, the one that's currently the most popular is the clients, followed by technology, and you can read into that whatever you like. We're continuing with our Tuesday roundtables, just sort of coming to the end of the sort of quite active period now, coming into summer, through Wimbledon and England playing football and all the other good things that are going on. So we're going to be taking a break from the Tuesdays, but in place we'll be rolling out some what we're going to call 24/7 networking clubs, so that people can still stay in touch, even if we're perhaps not holding events over the next couple of months. So I'll drop you a note about that shortly. Generally, I think we over 1,000 people were watching the videos in the past month in the collection, and there's all sorts of topics, and we're really pleased to be adding additional topics today. Next, what happened next? Well, peer groups. We've got, I think I mentioned last week, 100% renewal on our peer groups, and we'll be starting a couple of new ones in the autumn, probably one for managing partners and one for COOs. So again, we hope that that will be of interest, and myself or Claire will be in touch with you about that. As regards this show, again, as I think you may have recalled from last week, we're going to be running it next week, the 9th of July. Then we're taking a break to the 17th of September. And then it'll be fortnightly after that, because I think we probably all need, I won't say a break, but I think it would be good to kind of have a slightly less frenetic pace to these things. But obviously we'll continue to run the polls and do all the other good things that we do. So they will be very similar once we get to that magic point. So what are we doing today? Well, firstly, I really wanted to remind you about polls that, as the government has said to us on several occasions now, our poll results are incredibly valuable in our analysis during these dynamic times. Now, are we equally dynamic? I don't know, but government is still interested in our polls. That's the key message, I suppose. And let's just quickly look through some of the results from the poll that we conducted last week. And if you recall, the topic was cyber, in particular, cybersecurity. And I think, to be honest, I kind of came away from that poll thinking, well, people may be on the board, but I think they kind of think of cyber as being something that they can delegate to their tech team. So some boards obviously just wanted to be kept informed. Others were, quite frankly, discussing cyber risks at every meeting, and pretty much everything in between with no particular pattern. And we'll show you that in a sec. We're going to talk a lot about people today. And I think one of the key sort of elements that emerged from that poll and the subsequent discussion with Chris Gaines was that actually, if you really want to prevent an attack, then actually you can't rely on your tech team alone. They're obviously the front line, if you like, but actually it really involves everybody. And in that sense, and we'll talk about behaviors, I'm sure, today, actually thinking about rewarding people for preventing an attack and or sanctions for facilitating an attack, particularly to senior people, that's always an interesting area, are very, very uncommon. I mean, like 80%, I think, of you were never doing that. And I think, therefore, that suggests that cybersecurity is still as a technical issue. Well, of course, you don't have to pick up the newspapers to read about ransomware, whether it's the Irish health system or the US petrol or whatever it happens to be. There is clearly a very significant amount of activity with bad actors, literally ransomware as a service. You can buy it on the dark web, apparently. So what are people thinking about? Well, the kind of what I call the obvious suspects, the phishing, the malware, the passwords, and the compromised software are being thought about. But very few people are thinking about things like eavesdropping. There's actually quite a lot of smart ways that these bad actors can get into your system. And that one in particular, man in the middle, sometimes called, is one that people really weren't thinking about at all, I think. What are the risk indicators? We all talk about KPIs as key performance indicators. I think we could call them CRI, common risk indicators, or cyber risk indicators, maybe better. But what are the things that people felt they were vulnerable? Where were they vulnerable, if you like? And I think the areas that came through quite strongly was we don't necessarily really understand what's involved and how we could be affected. Internally, we're not really, the front line aren't really keeping the people in the center informed when they come across something that could be a problem. And some firms still have cultural resistance to this notion of having to do password, all the sort of what I call the housekeeping almost these days, which I think is kind of risky, quite frankly. And then last point, really, I think your ransomware attack recovery plans. Have you ever heard that expression before? Actually, you will in the future, I'm sure, but I think they really do need quite a lot of work. And that starts with, do you pay the ransom? And we had some chat about the ethics involved. So let's have a look at some of the what we talk about here. Let's look at some of those charts in a bit more depth. So there is no pattern to board engagement in cyber risk. And at the top, we have things like the board views the risk as an integral part of innovation and growth. It's led from the top. It's everybody who's involved. And there's about 20% of the firms who, well, that's true. Next one down was our board manages the risk and ensures that it informs our strategy and vice versa. About 25% on that one. The board articulates the cyber risks and tracks compliance, about 13. The biggest of all, we're kept informed on a regular basis. 6%, our board doesn't consider it as a board issue, and 12% weren't sure. So to me, that's no real pattern emerging. And I think that's therefore an area which you as leaders could look into and look to move up that chart, if you know what I mean. In terms of the ransomware attack recovery plans, the top one, and I appreciate you may not be able to read it very clearly, but what is restoring IT infrastructure? Well, that's a bit like after the horses, after the horse is bolted, the stable door question. Yeah, of course you've got to do it, but it doesn't really help you. Keeping your regulators and professional bodies informed, 41%. I should say at the bottom one, unsure, 41%. So I think there's a lot of people on boards who probably don't even know what the plans look like. And if this is as big an issue as it is, I don't think that's, in my mind anyway, from a board perspective, sufficient investigation of the issue in order to come to a board decision. But again, I may be controversial in saying that. Third one down is insurance cover. Have you got the suitable cyber liability? Apparently, if you get attacked, it goes up by a factor of 3. So there's a money issue there to think about. Are you preventing further attacks? The fourth one. Again, we're down to about a third now. Are you coordinating the response? Are you informing those adversely affected by the attack? That's only a third. Well, if your people aren't being told, and we're talking about people a lot today, you really have a problem. Are you going to pay the ransom? A quarter of you have that in the plan, and 12% don't have a plan at all. So I think what our poll has shown is that this is an area where firms really do need to pay attention. And what's fascinating is that, people say, oh, it's only cyber, whatever. And actually the views of Chris's Gaines's video have been actually much lower than many of the other more ones that we run on out leadership or whatever happens to be. Maybe there's a message there as well. Who knows? We'll tell. But it's certainly worth watching. And the last one we looked at here was really rewards and sanctions. And over on the left is never. And that's in the 70%. So the firm will not give public rewards. We're not talking about, oh, thanks very much. We're talking about public rewards. In other words, making an effort to show that you care and that that contribution is really valued. And this is obviously not for people who are in the specialist roles, but for others. And that public sanctions for conduct by a director or partner that facilitated a cyber attack. And I'm not talking about somebody deliberately opening the front door. That's clearly not going to happen. But we all know that bad actors take advantage of bad behaviors, put it that way. So about 15, 20% do it sometimes, normally is 6%, and consistently is 0% when it comes to rewards, and maybe 12% when it comes to sanctions. And I think, and we all know from neuroscience, that rewards are critical if you want to bring about behavior change. So I think there's some disconnect there between the brain science and the way that people are managing how they deal with cyber. So maybe people don't think of them in the same place, but actually believe strongly that they are. So that's really, I think, enough on on last week's poll. I think it was a really interesting poll, and I'm pleased we did it, even if possibly it was seen as a bit sort of specialist. But I think, as Francesca said last week, doesn't paint a very positive picture, that one. So what are we going to talk about this week? Well, we're doing the monthly sector tracker. And the monthly sector tracker, for if you're not familiar with it, and I suspect most people on the call, we've done it about 15 plus times, I think, is the one that I think government is probably most interested in. So please complete. The topics are covered are business priorities, barriers to optimal performance, the issues being discussed at management meetings, the projected dip in your firm's income, activity levels, headcount, new workflow, extent of home working, office space requirements post-pandemic. And we're kind of getting there now, so it'll be interesting to see. Now, my suspicion is that we won't see many changes from a month ago, but hey, I could be proved wrong. So let's see, what did this week's poll tell us? What's the monthly tracker? Well, the first thing is that increasing operational efficiency remains the top priority. That hasn't changed at all. Next, looking through, we've got technology coming through quite high this week, this month, along with people's skills and capabilities. So technology hasn't been as high for the last few months, so maybe there's something there about new products. In terms of level of dip in firms' income, 100% none. That is consistent with last month. In terms of do you expect to expand or contract the level of activity at your firm over the next year? Modest expansion is the main item, 79%. No change, 21. No contraction, again, consistent with a month ago. Similar picture over new work, although there's a few people, 7-8%, who are looking at a modest contraction there. And when it comes to headcount, and I don't think I've seen it this positive before, expansion in headcount, 86%. So I think there is definitely, people are moving away from what I would call demand perspective to possibly more of a supply perspective, if that makes sense. What proportion of your people are likely to be working from home after the pandemic has eased? And around half is, as always, at the midpoint. So again, no particular changes there. We always have about 20% of people who are not going back to the office ever. A few people who are, everyone's going back, following Goldman Sachs example, I guess. Anticipating changes to office space requirements after the pandemic has eased. The about the same is growing, 64%. And I suspect that's probably a function of growth as much as anything else, because whilst nobody's looking for more space, as you take on more people, that's clearly what people are telling us, that you will need the space for them in some ways. And I think 30-something% are now looking for less space. But I think, again, that's about the lowest I've seen. So I think as we move closer to this July 19th and what everybody's talking about as being most of the restrictions being lifted, I think more people will be going back to the office. That's kind of my sense. Let's see if that's shown by the next one. In terms of constraints, what's getting in the way? Yeah, employee turnover. Now, that has not been the top constraint for many months, probably for a year. It was back in February of last year, actually, February of 2020. It's interesting, when you talk about last year, you think about 2019. 2020 didn't exist. Good, curious, isn't it? And so employee turnover is the one that nowadays is then, and lack of skills or talent coming in as well. So I guess what we're seeing here is the poor economic outlook falling back, the financial health of the client base falling back as well. So those were the two big constraints over the past 6 to 9 months. They're now going back to the more traditional constraints. We're in growth mode. We've got problems with employee turnover, and problems is probably the right word. Constraints is probably more accurate. And we are looking at possibly areas where we need to boost up our skills and talent. So again, really look forward to what Anna has to say on that. So what are the three areas that normally carry the most weight during partner-directed discussions? Finance is, as always, top of the pack, but people have now come through, and there is sort of, whereas marketing has fallen back. So again, if you're in heavy growth mode, the people become much higher agenda. And I think, again, that reflects the position of maybe 18 months ago before we went through this strange period. And what about the employees? How do they feel about their leaders? Employees are valued at least as highly as other stakeholders, 93%. Our leaders share strategic options, 73%. Pain being shared, that's less. Leaves accessible, 80, transparent, 16. Andrew Kakabadze, who is on our board and has been on the show, and he says that those numbers are exceptional. I appreciate this is a barometer. It's not a formal poll or survey in that sense, but he said basically, I think one of the reasons why we have been, as a sector, so successful, if that's the right word, through the pandemic, it's not an oxymoron, really, successful pandemic, and leave that aside, is because we've actually been much more effective at leadership, and you as leaders on this call hopefully will recognize that your contribution has been critical. We certainly picked it up in our annual awards a few weeks ago, where we had some fantastic entries for leadership's contribution to the business. So Max, he is responsible for the Senior Partners Office at McKinsey. He, in his career, has been a partner in McKinsey, and I think I'm correct in saying had very much a people focus at that stage, and then wrote what is only, I think, one of the first, and I think one of the top books. We were talking the other day about how would you celebrate his 25th year. The Tao of Coaching, followed up with 2 other Tao books and other books, and has sold 1 million copies, which I think is an amazing feat. So congratulations on that. And I've asked Max to come along today and for his 5 minutes to talk about a little bit about what are the, how can you be a high performance coach? Because all too often the leadership style that you need to adopt in our world, particularly in our sector, is that of a coach. And in order to help your people be more effective. So how can you be better in that role?
So I'm going to talk briefly about how you can become an even higher performance coach. I'm going to use a checklist that has stood me well for many decades, really. It's a checklist about mastery in general. So you can definitely use this to become a better high performance coach. And you can even use it if you are a coach to help your coachees become masters in their fields as well. I developed this checklist from having looked at the old master painters. I love painting, but I also love the old masters. And I kind of looked at how they became old masters. So it seems to work in every field of endeavor to become a new master as well. Richard will have a link to to a longer description of this if you're interested. But the framework is, if I'm allowed to do this, just here. Don't know if you can see that. It's just a little checklist. So I'm just going to run through fairly quickly these 6 points here. These are the things that the old masters really did well, and that's what helped them to become masters. And I'll try to illustrate the relevance of coaching as well. The first of these is prior art. It's studying things that have happened before, perhaps even obsessively. So, for example, the hyperactive old master Theodore Géricault, who loved painting horses and actually died having fallen off one. But he sat down, he spent months in the Louvre Museum in France, slavishly copying earlier old masters like Rubens and Michelangelo, and even Rubens himself, spent time copying Leonardo's works. So this obsessive kind of getting into what have people found that works so far is really important. And what does that mean for you in terms of coaching and becoming a high performance coach? It's certainly more than just graduating from a coaching course and completing the required number of CPD hours. Perhaps it's, and I'm just going to offer some suggestions as we go through this, but it's really more for you to think about what these would mean for you. I don't know, getting a session with a top coach like Tony Robbins and trying to figure out exactly what he does, arranging fishbowl coaching sessions where you can see other coaches in action, learning about sports psychology, for example. How can that be applied to non-sports psychology? Whatever it is, the equivalent of Theodore Géricault sitting down and slavishly copying the Louvre, I think that's the thing to look for. Who are your experts? Who are your role models? And then to look at how they do it, learn and apply your skills. So that's the sort of prior art part of this. The next suggestion is about places, which is putting yourself in new situations where you can absorb new ideas, unexpected influences, meet new people. This is like being Gauguin, who was a globetrotter, or Turner, who was a tourist, or Van Gogh, who was a kind of virtual voyager of art as he got to understand Japanese art, etc. So putting yourself in different places where a whole range of unpredictable things will happen, but that you will get new influences. So for a master coach, what does that mean? Well, I suppose it's things like perhaps volunteering to coach people incarcerated in a prison. I mean, I've always wanted to actually do that. You will learn so much from that completely new environment. Or think about the organization that you love to coach in, but you haven't broken into yet. You know, how could you get in there? Perhaps a pro bono activity to get into that new place. Coach in a kindergarten. I mean, you'll find a lot of id and ego to practice on and deal with there. The third point is peers. Now, many of these old masters worked in communities where they could learn from each other and develop their mastery. One example of working with peers, of course, is this Zoom session today. But what are other ways you could learn from your peers? Perhaps set up a mutual informal supervision program with a number of your peers, some kind of buddy program to keep you online with your goals for developing your coaching skills. Perhaps a coaching book group. Don't know if they exist, probably should, where you once a quarter sit down with some peers and share some ideas on coaching. I'm sure you can think of many other ways, but this thing about learning from peers is definitely a way to become a master. How about patrons now? I mean, the old masters, these patrons played a very interesting mixed role of both customer and mentor, and they were very instrumental in helping the lowly painter become a master. They're crucial to our modern careers as well. You know, so who are your patrons? Who are your advocates? Who are your ambassadors? How can you reach out to them and show that you are someone that they will want to be a patron of? Somebody once said, your network is not who you know. Your network is not who you know. It's who knows you. And that's a different group of people, potentially. So how do you build your own brand and go about attracting patrons? It's definitely worth thinking about. Practice at the top there. Okay, given the time constraints, I won't go into detail here, but we've all learned about the 10,000 hours of practice needed to become a master. I think the main thing to point out is obviously that it's deliberate practice. It's deliberate practice. It's about setting some stretching boundaries, some uncomfortable ones perhaps, so you can really stretch yourself there. I'm not going to go into that one in detail. And then finally, passion, or perhaps purpose, if you are lucky enough to have found yours. I think many people, it's a lifelong quest, isn't it, finding your purpose? But what is your passion and purpose as regarding coaching? And whether it's discovering the meaning in life or just discerning which moments in coaching give you the most joy, getting in tune with that is definitely one of the ways to become a master coach. And it may be a master coach in a slightly different way than that which you've been before. I often believe we often overlook the fact that passion is actually something that can change over time. You know, we go on this search for our purpose and our meaning, and we think it's there, something to be discovered, but actually it can change over time. And so, for example, just one example of that from the old masters, Turner started off as a simple sort of 3D cartographer. He was practically a map maker. He tried to capture the shape of the landscape, but then he went on to sort of redefine his purpose and his passion, which was ultimately trying to capture the elemental forces of nature on canvas. So only you can answer this question, but what is your passion in coaching, and how can you move your circle of activity to more overlap with your circle of passion?
Thanks very much, Max. That was actually superb. To invite Anna to come and talk to us about developing and leading your people. So over to you, Anna.
I think this topic, as your poll showed, is super relevant to all of us. And as well as London office senior partner, I head up our client relationships for KPMG across the professional services sector. So looking forward to sharing some insights from our clients that we're talking to at the moment, as well as what's happening at KPMG. So I want to look at this through three lenses: leading and developing people in terms of staff, managers, and the leaders that we're also all responsible for. If I think first of all about staff and how our staff are feeling as most of us move towards a hybrid model, obviously we're not there yet. I don't know about your firm, but at KPMG, the vast majority of people still working from home and haven't been back into the office since March last year. Some have, but the majority still haven't. I was talking with my reverse mentor the other day about what she wants for the future. And she says right now what she wants to do is she wants to earn, she wants to learn, and she wants to work with purpose. So straight back to that purpose word that you mentioned, Max, there. So that's what somebody roughly average age of our staff, 27, wants from our firm right now. What does that mean for us as leaders? Well, when we think about developing, leading our people with staff, it's often formal learning that we think about first of all. Those professional qualifications, people choose to join our firms because they want to learn and gain a professional qualification. Of course, they have moved online and very successfully. Some of us will have looked at reducing our learning and development budgets over the last year, often the first cost line to get focus and to get reduced when times are tough. If you've not started looking at that again and started thinking about how you bring your learning and development for all your staff to the forefront, please do now. You saw the issues that we're all focusing on. Our people are ambitious. They expect us to be investing in them. So it's certainly the time to think about learning and development outside professional qualifications. And also, I think sometimes we forget the benefit of learning. It's not just the skills that you learn whilst you're on the course. It's a chance to step away from the day job, which many of us need right now. It's really intense in our sector. And also to network with colleagues who are more senior than you. That was a big learning for us at KPMG. We moved too far to online learning before COVID was even a thing, and people were missing the chance to debate questions, maybe questions around purpose, with people of all generations in the firm. So certainly bring back some more formal learning opportunities. Learning by osmosis, of course, really important for many of us, and I'm sure your firms are thinking about how you do that, whether it's having a virtual audit room or a bid room with everybody on Teams at the same time during the day, so you can just raise your hand and ask a question just as you would if you were in a project room together. One more point I just wanted to raise when we're thinking about the development and how we develop our staff, one that's super important for inclusion and diversity, and that's how we allocate out the work. Because we all know, if you think back over your experience, remember when I was in transaction services, it was whether I got the really exciting project or before that, the opportunity to pitch to a client, that I really got the chance to learn, develop and show my potential. So one thing I really urge you to keep an eye on is make sure that you've got some sort of process in place to make sure that the allocation of the projects is fair and happening with some process behind it, so you can track that there's equal opportunity for people to allow themselves to show you their potential as well as develop. So some points there around staff. Let's move on to talk about managers. So that middle layer within our firm, super important right now as we start to transition to new ways of working. Now, their role has increased, I'm sure, in your firm over the time of COVID, where we've all been asking our managers to get much more involved in the well-being of their teams. So I'm sure many of you listening will have already had mental health initiatives, perhaps at board level before COVID hit, but my goodness, were they not tested over the last 18 months or so? So we're expecting our managers to continue, the forward-looking firms are absolutely expecting our managers to continue to have that insight and management of the well-being of their teams. We're also expecting them to play their role in learning and coaching in a hybrid world that we've just talked about. Many of us, as that poll just showed, are experiencing high employee turnover. I think it's a time when lots of people in professional services world are looking for change. Last few months have been hard. It's human, I think, to think, right, I need a change to put that behind. So I'm seeing turnover across the legal services, across the wider professional services sector that we've never seen before. That means for those managers on the ground, not only are they having to motivate a team where some have resigned, they're having to play their part in recruitment, but then they're having to play a crucial role in induction and coaching people as they join. So for all of those reasons, plus the fact that managers are dealing with uncertainty, and many of our workers, whatever field of professional services in, are the type of people who quite like to be in control. those managers need our support right now. They need focused leaders' time. They need to be reassured they're doing a good job. They need to be thanked, and we need to be there for them. Then finally, just to wrap up on leaders, so us, the people at the senior levels of our firm, we're dealing with change. We need to have that empathy. And of course, we're all on the roller coaster of COVID. Our resilience will be tested at times. We need to keep mistakes in proportion. We'll all make them. We're living in an environment of change. So testing and learning and talking in that way, crucial. And finally, Richard, you talked about holiday at the start, and we'll be pausing some of the sessions of this group. I think that's spot on. If you've not already spoken to your senior leaders about the need for them to show leadership by role modeling, taking holiday this summer, please do that. I strongly advise it.
Thanks very much, Anna. That was great. Now let's move into the panel session, and I'd like to invite Francesca to come and share her thoughts on what she's heard from Max and Anna today.
Oh, thank you, Richard. And first of all, happy birthday. I hope you're going to have a lovely day. 21 again, Richard. Lovely to see. There was just so much today, and thank you for both of the panelists, because I thought there were some really exciting elements in there. I do love the coaching framework, and I just a couple of comments around just how important I think coaching is to professional service firms. And it's quite easy to kind of go, well, that's something we'll get round to, or maybe that's an idea for later down the track. But it's so fundamental to what we're all trying to achieve in our professional service firms. And I think good firms really do embrace coaching, and they do encourage people to learn more about it. And that framework was absolutely terrific. There's a piece there, I think, around the behavioural shift that coaching can bring. And we certainly noticed that in our organisation. It really has changed people's mindsets, moved away from the old command and control, the dreadful years of that, into something much more fruitful. But one of the things I think has been incredibly powerful about the COVID years has been that it's been possible to coach online. Although that day-to-day interaction is hugely important, particularly for people early on in their career, you can do a lot of coaching online. Well, we took our whole coaching program virtual and have been able to do it around the world, and it is something that can transfer. So really worth thinking about that if you're still stuck being able to travel between offices and locations. Lots of great stuff from Anna. I love all the different elements that come together within that people piece, and how important it is when your core asset's really your people. We all do the same kind of things in accounting services, but the difference is how you behave and how you deliver, and the people at the root of that. Just sort of picking up to 2 quick points before we move to other questions, but the hybrid model and the joys of how on earth we all cope with a new world, and what does that look like? I actually went into my office this week for the first time in 14 months. Still there. It looked quite clean because no one's been there. But it is fascinating to see that beginning drip back into the cities. And I know it's going to take everybody a long time to work out what's the best practice, what's the best way to go. But again, how you work with people who do want, and I love that's what you said, Anna, about what 27-year-olds want. They want to earn, they want to learn, and they want purpose. That's a real challenge to a lot of organizations to give that environment. But last but not least, the joy of networking. This week, I was running one of our regional meetings with our African firms, and none of them can travel between countries, or barely any can travel between. And we did all the networking online, and we did a couple of sessions where really all we did was put people together in a room as if you were having a water cooler moment, a coffee break, and everyone absolutely loved it. It took very little effort to set up, but it's that informal contact, which I think is something we've all missed a lot, and fascinating to see how it is possible to kind of break the ice of reconnecting, and how important it was to enable people just to have that casual, informal conversation again. So back to you, Richard.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you so much, Francesca. And as if just really kind of thinking about everything we've heard, and there's so many points. I mean, perhaps I could start with Max and just ask Max, you talked to, obviously today, I mean, it was a masterclass in the things. I love the old masters analogy, but where do you start? Because a lot of people may not feel that they have been adequately trained as a coach, or indeed the coaching style may feel a little bit awkward to them, and they don't really therefore want to feel inauthentic when they're dealing with their people. So where would you counsel somebody who perhaps doesn't feel as confident about approaching people wearing that hat or mindset?
Well, I think you're right to distinguish between hat and mindset there. I mean, I think there is the hat of being some kind of official coach, but then you don't need to have that hat in order to do coaching. I think the reality is anybody who's a parent is kind of ideally doing a little bit of coaching at some point in their life and not just telling. So I think for many people, it actually comes quite naturally. I think if you have a new team member, that can be difficult because new relationships, when you start a new relationship, that can then be difficult to do your first bit of coaching, even if informal. And I think it's always best if the energy can come from the other person. If you can pick the moment, I think is really the key thing I would say. If you're really starting to coach an individual in an informal way for the first time, pick the moment where you think they are, most likely to be receptive to some help, and just think of it as helping them rather than coaching. So that would be a simple thought on that.
And Anna, from a leadership perspective, I mean, I suspect, as having been head of people and delivered people-based consultancy services, you're probably very, very familiar with a lot of this territory. But how do you help your fellow partners who possibly don't get the light that this is a good way to approach their people?
I absolutely agree with what Max just said. And we're used to, when we're building relationships with clients, asking questions, aren't we? Questions are then not immediately leaping in with a proposed solution, always tempting for partners in professional services firms. So I think, yes, helping is a really good way, Max. I'll borrow that, thank you. But I think asking questions as well. So and not always just taking the first answer. So are you fine? Yes. Are you sure? Just asking follow-on questions, just as we would with clients when we're exploring and helping them understand their needs.
Thanks. Francesca, I mean, the way you've been involved in a hybrid organization, Grant Thornton International, obviously you have an office in Fenchurch Street, but most of the people in the network are based in different countries. So in a sense, you are, as an organization or as an entity within Grant Thornton, probably more familiar with that sort of hybrid world than most. And are there any sort of lessons that you would like to share with us on that aspect?
Well, yeah, we certainly are virtual. I mean, the teams that I run are all over the world. There's very few people I could actually go and physically see right now. I think it's all about the art of connection, and I think you just have to work hard at it. Don't think there's any magic. I think it's just about making sure people feel connected and you have access to each other. Well, I was smiling because someone I was talking to this week was telling me they hadn't actually physically seen their team for at least a month, and I was going, crumbs, I think I see my team once a year, even the pandemic. So we do connect every week, and some people will speak to every day. So I think it is about exploring the value of technology to help you, but it's also about being available when people need you available. The great joy of global working is you've got the wonder that is different time zones. So we do have a few people who seem to always have to spend their meetings in their pajamas. It's either very early in the morning or very late at night. And you have to be very mindful of that you don't have the same people always feeling that they're doing the night shift or the early morning shift. So everybody needs to flex. And actually, I tend to find people are remarkably respectful of that and make sure that, sometimes they take one for the team and do an unholy hour so that we can gather together in a thoughtful way.
And just staying with that for a second, is there a sort of what I call social versus business dimension to it? Do you make sure you have a social conversation as well as business, or do you mix 100%. Them in the same meeting or have them different meetings? How do you deal with that aspect?
Oh, the social bit is hugely important, and we do tend to separate the two just because that tends to be more efficient for people. So we have very dedicated meetings that are very work orientated. I like to hope there's a bit of humour and sharing as part of that, but predominantly work orientated. And we do a very specific social meet that we deliberately don't talk about work for that meeting. It's about people sharing what's going on, and it might be about something they've gone and learned, which brings you beautifully to what Anna was talking about. They may have been on a MOOC, they may have done some additional learning, we have we're just in the process of setting up a bit of an informal book club, and the idea is to have things that aren't predominantly about the day-to-day.
Fantastic. And talking of clubs, I had somebody the other day who said, could they please set up the Francesca Lagerberg fan club? So there you go.
my £5 is in the post to them.
Coming back to Max, if I may, just again, thanks very much for sharing on sort of what baby steps and where people might start. But what's your sort of experience, again, wearing your McKinsey hat here, around the sort of the way that the consultancy teams have been working together in the hybrid world?
Yeah, well, it's been a process of unusual adventure and exploration for all of us, I think, hasn't it? And it's difficult to see any particular themes, I have to say. Each team seems to be a little bit different. It depends on what the client wants. It depends how the client's approaching all of this. If the client has all become very, work from home-ish, then they're very happy with the team working from home. I think if one is in professional services, there is a sort of obligation that we at least feel, even if the client doesn't feel, to sort of physically turn up there. And so, that has varied around the world. I think in the UK, where we had some really strict lockdowns, it was just, impossible, really. So that the question didn't arise. I think the more difficult time is actually in this grey zone area where, you could go to a client, and so the option is there. We've left it really, think global, act local. It's down to the individual CS client service team, as we call it, to make these decisions within a few guide rails, policy things. But we just left it to each individual because every client is different, really.
That's great. I'm just picking up, Anna, now your point around the middle managers, and maybe they've learned how to manage for the first time because all the traditional metrics weren't available. But how have you sort of tried to identify the middle managers that were doing okay and the ones that were clearly struggling because they just weren't used to having an isolated boss and an isolated team, if I can use that terminology?
Yeah, and you're right to call it out, because that's a really important thing to focus on. So we've, as partners, that's been our job. And I can't think of an exception, actually, of a partner who hasn't taken that seriously and has shown, frankly, a lot more interest in their team than some had in the past, and benefited from finding out more about their family background, and what's important to that individual. Really important right now, when we're in a very hot recruitment market, that all of us do understand our staff, their aspirations, and what's important to them. So yes, it's been partners stepping up, Richard, and engaging with managers in a way that perhaps some of them hadn't done in the past.
And as their senior partner, I don't know enough about how the relationships work, but I mean, have you found that there were times when this leadership needed to engage to help a particular, team that felt their leader wasn't delivering what they as individuals wanted? I mean, to what extent has there been more connection between the front line, if you like, and the leadership than possibly was the case before?
Well, again, significant increased connection, and I've missed my weekly Stay Connected call with my London region team to join you today. And frankly, I don't think anyone will want to go back on that level of connection we've got now. And Francesca, I loved your examples of how you manage your team. And I think that's what all forward-looking leaders are doing now. Though the gems of information you get from those calls make your job easier, better, and more fun.
Staying with fun. How do you? Where do talk about holidays and what I call the more personal side of life? I mean, how do you keep that in balance, Francesca, with the people you're working with?
Well, you know what? One of the things that I've heard many people speak about is how productivity over the last year has gone through the roof because people weren't taking holidays and weren't taking breaks. So, probably a message to us all to shut the laptop down and go outside and do some different things, and to encourage people to keep taking breaks wherever they're based. But fun, oh, how important is fun? We're at the office such a lot of the time, be it from our kitchen table or from our physical four walls. I think sometimes you forget how important the camaraderie is. The reason I was in London this week is a very good colleague of mine retired, and just getting together with a group of people who'd spent a decade or more together. You know, just the sheer joy of being physically in contact with people who you're not related to is just wonderful, and it's human nature. And I think bringing in, you know, some people have different senses of humor, but they still enjoy that banter, that camaraderie. And we were doing a particular meeting the other day, and we did a little mini scavenger hunt. Find something within easy reach that reminds you of home. And it was hilarious, the things people had and thought of, but also what you learnt about that. So I think it is about finding joy within the different elements of our life to give us that little balance and help us make sure that we do keep a sense of perspective about everything as well.
Staying with fun, Max, it's a strange question, but should coaching sessions be fun or are they always serious?
Well, I'm afraid everything should always be fun. I mean, and I think you can be fun and serious at the same time, right? And the examples Francesca gave there of the banter, I thought there's a good book title, Banter, isn't it? You know, I think, you know, you've got to get to the bottom of things in a coaching session. Obviously, it is in a sense a serious business, but I think that, you know, there's time for laughter in any conversation. I have to go to lead my mother's funeral in 2 weeks' time, and it will be tears, but there will be some laughter in that as well. So I think you can have joy in everything, really. Sorry to give a flippant answer, but I really think so.
Well, it was a flippant question, to be honest, Max. So
it wasn't. It
was just, you know, people kind of think of coaching as being a very sort of almost like confessional. Some people, I think, and therefore very serious. And, you know, you've got to wear a suit and all the rest. And so how do you bring a sort of an element of fun into it? I think is actually quite important. And I'm sure, Anna, we're coming up to the end now, but, you know, Anna, in terms of how do you make sure that you have a really great fun atmosphere at your office, even if everybody isn't physically in the office?
Well, it's back to asking questions, isn't it? And as a leader, setting the tone and saying something a bit ridiculous, something bonkers that's happened in your life that week. There's nothing like that. It is leading by example, I think, in setting a tone where you're open to crazy things that are happening to you. People love hearing about that.
Well, maybe we should be saying some crazy things. Over to you, Francesca, for the last word for today.
Well, I know that was a great session. I love listening to all of that, and I just going back to the coaching point, as Max beautifully said, you can bring some joy into everything that you do. And you know, if you want to have a confessional, you go to therapy. If you want to have a work experience that helps you go forward, think about things, be curious, I think coaching gives a great framework for it. So really enjoyed that, Richard. Really good to hear the different ideas as well. And I'm hoping that you're now going to go off and eat some birthday cake.
Well, a little bit later today, possibly. But of course, the trouble is there's a meeting, there's a webinar taking place, show taking place next Friday. And I have to get the invite out on Monday. And I can't do that until I process the poll. And I have actually made the videos for everybody that was on today in order to then put the links into that invite. So I have about a day's work between now and Sunday night. So I've been talking to my family. When can I squeeze it in order to enjoy my birthday celebrations with them?
Well, you definitely need to find some joy in there, Richard. Definitely.
Anyway, look, seriously, can I thank my wonderful panel today? Max, who and I think I can say this, Max, but you kindly dedicated your book about coaching to me as your mentor 25 years ago. So thank you for that. And I will always treasure that little contribution. Thank you for Francesca for sharing your fun. And Anna, thank you for reminding us that, yeah, it is all about example. And I think you've given a fantastic example today. And no, you didn't say anything that was bonkers. Don't worry. We thoroughly enjoyed everything that we heard. So thank you one and all to everybody for today's session. Look forward to next week. And we have